The Serpent's Gambit, a Harry Potter story. Act 1, The Discovery. Chapter 1, Disturbances in the Deep. The first sign that something was wrong came during Lyra Blackwood's Advanced Ancient Runes class on a Tuesday morning in late October. She was bent over a particularly complex translation of Elder Futhark when the carved stone tablet before her began to smoke. "Professor Babbling," she called, her voice carefully neutral despite the alarm creeping up her spine. "I think there's something." The tablet cracked with a sound like breaking bone. The runes, which had been glowing softly with magical energy moments before, flared brilliant white and then died completely. Around the classroom, similar tablets began smoking, their ancient magic sputtering like dying candles. Professor Babbling rushed to Lyra's desk, her usually composed face pale with confusion. "This shouldn't be possible," she murmured, running her fingers over the now cold stone. "These tablets have been stable for centuries." Lyra gathered her things quickly as the class was dismissed early, but her mind was already racing. Ancient runes didn't simply fail, not unless something was interfering with the magical foundations that powered them. She'd read enough about magical theory in her family's extensive library to know that much. The Slytherin common room was buzzing with similar stories when she arrived. Marcus Flint was describing how all the self-stirring cauldrons in potions had begun spinning backward, while Pansy Parkinson complained that her enchanted quill had written nothing but gibberish during transfiguration. But it was the mention of the portraits that made Lyra's blood run cold. "The fat lady went completely blank for nearly 10 minutes, Millicent Bulstrode was saying. "Just an empty frame with a bit of countryside in the background. She came back looking terrified, said she couldn't remember where she'd been." Lyra slipped away from the group, her mind churning. Portraits, ancient runes, magical artifacts, all connected to Hogwarts's fundamental magical infrastructure. This wasn't random magical interference. This was systematic. She needed to research this properly, and for that, she needed the restricted section. Chapter 2, Convergence. Marcus Chen had always prided himself on his logical approach to magic. While his Ravenclaw housemates often got lost in theoretical discussions, he preferred practical applications of magical theory. Which was why the arithmetic inconsistencies he'd been noticing for the past week were driving him to distraction. The numbers weren't adding up, literally. He spread his calculations across 3 tables in the library, checking and rechecking his work. Every magical equation he'd attempted in the past week had required different constants than they should have. It was as if the magical field around Hogwarts itself was fluctuating. "Excuse me," a crisp voice said behind him. "You're in my spot." Marcus turned to find a Slytherin girl with sharp features and darker skin, her black hair pulled back in a severe bun. She was carrying an armload of books that looked far too advanced for a student. "I didn't realize the library had assigned seating," he replied, not moving. "It doesn't, but I need these specific tables for my research, and you're in the way." Her eyes flicked over his calculations with obvious interest despite her dismissive tone. "Arithmetic analysis of magical field fluctuations. How? Predictable." "Predictable?" Marcus bristled. "These calculations are anything but predictable. The magical constants have been shifting for days, and no one seems to notice or care." The girl, he thought her name was Lyra something, set down her books with a sharp thud. "Of course they're shifting. The question is why?" She pulled out a chair across from him and began arranging her own research materials. Marcus caught glimpses of titles that made his eyebrows rise. Ley lines and localized magical fields, the foundational charms of Hogwarts Castle, ancient ward structures in medieval magical architecture. "You think this is connected to Hogwarts's foundations?" he said, not quite a question. "I think," Lyra said carefully, "that someone with a functioning brain cell might be useful for this research, even if they are in Ravenclaw." Marcus considered being offended, then decided intellectual curiosity trumped house pride. "What exactly are you researching?" "The systematic destabilization of Hogwarts' magical infrastructure," she replied matter-of-factly. "And if my initial theories are correct, we are all in considerably more danger than anyone realizes." Chapter 3. The Room of Requirement Incident. Sage Clearwater had always found peace in the greenhouse corridors. Even at 11 o'clock at night, the humid air and earthy smells of growing things soothed her in ways the Hufflepuff common room never could. She was checking on a batch of venomous tentacula seedlings when she heard the voices. Can't possibly be coincidence. The patterns are too regular, too precise." "I agree, but we need more data before we can—" Sage frowned and stepped closer to the window. Two figures were walking across the grounds in the moonlight, their voices carrying clearly in the still air. A Slytherin girl and a Ravenclaw boy, both carrying what looked like heavy books and scrolls. She was about to return to her plants when a brilliant flash of light erupted from the 7th floor of the castle. It was gone in an instant, but the magical pulse that followed it made every plant in the greenhouse shiver and recoil. Sage was running before she'd consciously decided to move. She reached the 7th floor corridor just as the two students she'd seen on the grounds came pounding up the stairs. The Slytherin girl, Lyra Blackwood, Sage realized now, was breathing hard but still clutching her research materials. "What happened?" the Ravenclaw boy demanded. "We felt the pulse from outside." "I don't know," Sage panted. "I was in the greenhouse when there was this flash of light, and all the plants—" Another pulse, stronger this time, knocked all three of them against the wall. The portraits along the corridor flickered like badly tuned television sets, and several suits of armor began walking aimlessly down the hall before stopping abruptly, as if they'd forgotten what they were doing. "The Room of Requirement," Lyra breathed. "It's coming from the Room of Requirement." They found the door already open, which should have been impossible. The Room of Requirement only appeared when someone needed it, and only they could enter. But there it was, a simple wooden door standing ajar, with dangerous-looking purple light spilling from within. "We should get a professor," Sage said, even as she stepped closer to the door. "And tell them what?" The Ravenclaw boy Marcus, she thought his name was, asked. "That we were out of bounds after curfew researching magical anomalies? They'll blame us for whatever's happening." A fourth voice cut through their debate. "Well, this is interesting." They spun to find a tall boy with reddish hair and a distinctly Irish accent watching them with curious eyes. His Gryffindor tie was loosened, and he looked entirely too calm for someone who'd just witnessed magical chaos. "Finn O'Sullivan," he introduced himself with a slight bow. "And unless I'm much mistaken, you three are about to do something incredibly stupid and dangerous." "We're not," Sage began. Another pulse from the room, this one strong enough to crack the stone walls. The castle itself seemed to groan under the strain. "Right then," Finn said cheerfully, pulling out his wand. "Count me in." Before anyone could protest, he strode through the door. The Room of Requirement had transformed into something none of them had ever seen before. The walls were covered in a complex network of glowing lines that pulsed with sickly purple light. At the center of the room, a massive runic circle was carved into the floor, and at its heart stood a pillar of what looked like crystallized magic, crackling with unstable energy. "Someone's been busy," Finn said conversationally, as if they'd walked into a particularly interesting transfiguration classroom rather than what was obviously a highly illegal magical working. "This is—" Lyra's voice was barely a whisper. "This is a ley line manipulation array. Someone's trying to tap directly into Hogwarts' foundational magic." The crystal pulsed again, and this time the feedback was strong enough to knock them all to their knees. When Sage looked up, she saw cracks spreading across the runic circle. "It's unstable," Marcus said, his face pale with understanding. "Whatever they're doing, they've pushed it too far. The whole system is going to collapse, and take half the castle with it," Lyra added grimly. Finn was already moving, his wand tracing complex patterns in the air. Well then, we'd better stop it, hadn't we? The four students looked at each other, Slytherin, Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff, and Gryffindor. And in that moment, house rivalries seemed suddenly trivial compared to the task before them. The crystal pulsed again, and they got to work. Working together with desperate efficiency, they managed to contain the magical feedback long enough for the unstable array to burn itself out. When the purple light finally died, they were left in darkness, breathing hard and covered in magical residue that made their skin tingle. So, Finn said after a long moment, anyone else think we should probably figure out who did this before they try again? In the silence that followed, Sage realized that her peaceful life of plants and homework had just become considerably more complicated. Tomorrow, Lyra said, her voice steady despite everything they'd just witnessed. We meet tomorrow and figure out what we're really dealing with. The four students made their way back to their respective common rooms through corridors that seemed subtly different now, as if the castle itself was still recovering from whatever had been done to it. None of them slept well that night, and all of them had the same thought. This was only the beginning. Act 2, The Investigation. Chapter 4, Unlikely Alliances. The next evening found them in an abandoned classroom on the 3rd floor, one that Lyra had determined was far enough from any regular patrol routes to avoid detection. She'd arrived first, spreading her research materials across several desks with the precision of someone accustomed to working alone. Marcus appeared next, levitating a stack of arithmetic charts and looking like he hadn't slept in days. "I've been running calculations all night," he announced without preamble. The magical field fluctuations aren't random. They're following a specific pattern 1 that corresponds to the castle's ley line network. "Of course they are," Lyra said dryly. "I could have told you that yesterday if you'd bothered to listen." "I was listening. I was also verifying." Marcus spread his charts across an adjacent desk. "There's a difference between theory and proof." Sage entered quietly, carrying a small potted plant that seemed to be glowing faintly. "Mimbolus Mimbletonia," she explained when she caught their stares. "Professor Sprout says they're sensitive to magical disturbances. This one hasn't stopped glowing since last night." Finn arrived last, sliding through the door with the casual grace of someone who made a habit of being places he shouldn't be. "Right then, what have we got?" "Evidence that someone is systematically weakening Hogwarts's protective wards," Lyra said, getting straight to business. "The question is who, and more importantly, why?" Marcus pulled out a long scroll covered in complex diagrams. "Based on the fluctuation patterns, I can map where the next disturbance is likely to occur, but I need more data points to be certain." "I might be able to help with that," Sage said hesitantly. "Plants are connected to the magical field in ways most people don't understand. If I can get access to specimens from different parts of the castle, and I," Finn said with a grin that suggested he was enjoying this far too much, "happen to know all the best ways to get into places we're not supposed to be." Lyra studied each of them in turn, her dark eyes calculating. "You realize what we're proposing? If we're right, then someone with considerable magical skill is actively working to undermine Hogwarts. And if we're caught investigating, then we'll be in detention for the rest of our natural lives," Marcus finished. "I'm aware of the risks. The alternative is doing nothing while someone potentially destroys the castle," Sage added quietly. "I can't live with that." "Plus," Finn said cheerfully, "it beats sitting in the common room listening to everyone speculate about the Triwizard Tournament. This is actual adventure." Lyra nodded slowly. "Then we divide our efforts. Marcus, I need you to continue mapping the disturbance patterns. Focus on the restricted section. There are books there about Hogwarts's construction that might give us insight into which areas are most vulnerable. Sage, can you monitor the magical field through your plants? If you can establish a network of sensitive specimens throughout the castle, we might be able to predict disturbances before they occur. And me? Finn asked. You're going to help me with the dangerous part, Lyra said with a smile that wasn't entirely pleasant. We're going to investigate the areas where the disturbances have been strongest. Chapter 5. The Founder's Failsafe. 3 days later, Marcus sat surrounded by towers of ancient books, in the deepest corner of the restricted section, his head spinning with centuries-old magical theory. Madame Pince had given him suspicious looks when he'd requested access for advanced arithmetic research, but his exemplary academic record had earned him the privilege. He was deep in a treatise on structural ward integration in large-scale magical architecture when he found it, a single paragraph that made his blood run cold. In the event that Hogwarts Castle should fall under the influence of dark magic, the founders implemented a fail-safe mechanism within the very stones of the structure. This system, known only to each head of house in succession, can be activated to purge all magical influence from the castle, both dark and light. The cost of such activation would render Hogwarts uninhabitable for magical persons, but would preserve the structure itself for future generations should the corruption be cleansed. Marcus read the passage 3 times before its implications fully sank in. Someone wasn't just trying to weaken Hogwarts's defenses, they were trying to trigger the Founder's fail-safe. But why would anyone want to make Hogwarts uninhabitable? Unless... He grabbed a piece of parchment and began scribbling notes frantically. If someone wanted to control Hogwarts to reshape it according to their own vision, they would first need to clear away all existing magical protections. The failsafe would do exactly that, wiping the slate clean. But triggering it would require precise manipulation of the castle's ley line network, the kind of delicate magical work that would cause exactly the disturbances they'd been observing. Marcus gathered his books and notes, his mind racing. He needed to find the others immediately. Chapter 6. Green Secrets. Sage had always known that plants were more aware than most people realized, but she'd never tried to use that awareness for espionage before. It felt wrong, somehow, like asking friends to spy on their neighbors. But the Mimbulus Mimbletonia in her dormitory hadn't stopped glowing, and now 3 other specimens she'd placed around the castle were showing similar signs of distress. Something was definitely wrong. She was tending to a patch of flutterby bushes near the greenhouses when Professor Sprout approached. Her usually cheerful face creased with worry. "Sage, dear, I'm glad I found you. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." Sage's stomach clenched. Had Professor Sprout discovered their investigation? "Of course, Professor. Several of my rarest specimens have gone missing over the past week. Moonstone daisies, essence of belladonna, dried salamander scales, powdered unicorn horn." Professor Sprout's voice grew more troubled with each item. "These aren't ingredients a student would typically need, and they're not items that could be misplaced accidentally." "You think someone stole them?" "I think someone with very specific knowledge took exactly what they needed for a very dangerous potion." Professor Sprout knelt beside Sage, lowering her voice. "These ingredients, combined properly, could create a solution capable of temporarily severing magical connections. In large quantities, it could affect the castle's magical infrastructure," Sage finished, her heart racing. Professor Sprout's eyes sharpened. "That's a very specific conclusion for a 6th-year student to reach." Sage felt heat rise in her cheeks. She couldn't lie to Professor Sprout, but she also couldn't reveal their investigation without consulting the others. "I've been noticing that the plants around the castle have been agitated, more so than usual." "Plants are sensitive to magical disturbances," Professor Sprout said slowly. "If someone were manipulating the castle's magical field, the plants would react," Sage agreed. "Professor, if someone were trying to damage Hogwarts's magical protections, Would these stolen ingredients help them do it? Professor Sprout was quiet for a long moment, studying Sage's face. "Come with me," she said finally. "There's something you need to see." She led Sage to the back of Greenhouse 3, to a section that was usually kept locked. Inside, several large plants that Sage didn't recognize were withering, despite being in perfect growing conditions. "These are wardroot vines," Professor Sprout explained. "They are connected directly to Hogwarts' protective magic. They've been growing here since the castle was built." "They're dying, Sage. Whatever's happening to the castle's magic, it's serious enough to kill plants that have survived for 1,000 years." Sage stared at the dying vines, her throat tight with emotion. Plants that had been alive since the time of the founders, now dying because someone was poisoning the very magic that sustained them. "I need to go," she said quietly. "I need to tell the others." Professor Sprout caught her arm gently. "Others?" Sage met her professor's eyes and saw understanding there, along with something that might have been approval. "We're trying to stop it," she said simply. Professor Sprout nodded. "Be careful, dear. And remember, if you need help, there are adults you can trust." Chapter 7. Family Shadows. Finn had always been good at getting into places he shouldn't be, but breaking into the room of requirement when it didn't want to be found was proving more challenging than expected. The night they'd discovered the magical array, the room had appeared on its own, drawn into existence by whatever unstable magic was being worked inside it. Now, with the immediate danger past, the room was being stubborn about manifesting. He'd been pacing the 7th-floor corridor for 20 minutes, thinking desperately about needing to investigate the runic array they'd found, when the door finally appeared. The room looked different now, cleaner somehow, as if all traces of the previous night's magical working had been scrubbed away. But Finn had learned long ago to look beyond surface appearances. He pulled out a device that looked like a cross between a compass and a telescope, a gift from his Uncle Seamus, who'd learned the value of magical detection equipment during his own school adventures. The needle spun wildly as soon as he activated it, confirming that residual magical energy still saturated the room. "Interesting technique," a voice said behind him. Finn spun, his wand already in his hand, to find Lyra Blackwood standing in the doorway. She looked impressed, despite herself. "Magical resonance detector," he explained, lowering his wand but not putting it away. "Family heirloom. Your family has interesting heirlooms." Lyra stepped into the room, her own magical detection spells creating faint traces of light in the air. "Irish magical families with access to advanced detection equipment and the skills to break into warded rooms. Should I be concerned about what side you're really on?" Finn laughed, but there was no humor in it. "My family's been fighting dark wizards since before Voldemort was a whisper in Salazar Slytherin's nightmares. The question is whether you can say the same." "Blackwood is an old pureblood name," Lyra said carefully. "Some branches of the family tree have unfortunate associations." "And yours?" "My grandmother was a Selwyn. My grandfather refused to join Voldemort and spent 2 years in hiding as a result." Lyra's voice was steady, but Finn caught the slight tightening around her eyes. "Not all Slytherins chose the wrong side." Finn studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Fair enough. So what did you find?" Lyra moved to where the runic circle had been carved into the floor. Though the physical marks had been removed, her detection spells revealed the magical scarring left behind. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. This wasn't experimental magic. It was precise, practiced. Someone with formal training in curse-breaking or ward manipulation, Finn agreed. The kind of skills you'd learn in advanced defense against the dark arts. Or as an Auror, Lyra finished grimly. "We're not dealing with a student, or even a rogue professor. This is someone with professional training in magical security." Finn's resonance detector began spinning faster, its needle pointing toward the far wall. There's something else here, hidden but still active. They approached the wall cautiously, wands raised. Lyra cast a series of revealing charms while Finn's detector grew more agitated. There, Lyra breathed, pointing to what looked like ordinary stone. A concealment charm, but it's wrong somehow. Finn pressed his hand against the wall and immediately jerked it back. It's cold, magically cold. A stasis field, Lyra realized. They've left something here, preserved and hidden. Working together, they managed to dispel the concealment charm. What they found made them both step back in alarm. Carved into the stone was a symbol neither of them recognized, a serpent wrapped around a broken wand, with what looked like a map of Britain in the background. Below it, in elegant script, were the words, "The restoration begins." Restoration of what? Finn muttered. I don't know, Lyra said, but her voice had gone very quiet. But I think we're about to find out. Chapter 8. Convergence of Clues. They met that night in the same abandoned classroom, but the atmosphere was different now. The casual cooperation of their first meeting had been replaced by genuine urgency as each shared what they'd discovered. Marcus went first, his charts and calculations spread across multiple desks. Someone's trying to trigger the Founder's failsafe, he announced without preamble. It's a mechanism built into Hogwarts itself that can purge all magical influence from the castle. If activated, it would make Hogwarts uninhabitable for magical people. But why would anyone want that? Sage asked, though her face was pale with understanding. To start over, Lyra said grimly. If you wanted to rebuild Hogwarts according to your own vision, you'd first need to clear away all existing protections. Finn nodded. And we found evidence that whoever's behind this calls themselves the Restoration. They're not trying to destroy Hogwarts, they're trying to restore it to something. But restore it to what? Marcus asked. Sage pulled out a piece of parchment covered in her careful handwriting. Professor Sprout told me about the stolen ingredients. Combined properly, they could create a potion to temporarily sever magical connections. But she also said something else. These are ingredients that only someone with advanced knowledge would know to take. Professional-level knowledge, Lyra agreed. Cursebreaker or aura training. Or, Finn said slowly, someone who was taught by people with that kind of training. They all looked at him. What do you mean? Marcus asked. Former Death Eaters, Finn said bluntly. People who learned advanced dark magic during the war, but escaped justice afterward. They'd have the knowledge to do this kind of precise magical manipulation. But why now? Sage asked. Why during the Tri-Wizard tournament? Lyra's eyes widened as understanding dawned. Maximum impact. Representatives from magical schools across Europe are here, along with ministry officials from multiple countries. If something catastrophic happened to Hogwarts now, it would be seen as an international incident, Marcus finished. And if they could make it look like sabotage by the visiting schools, the political ramifications would be enormous, Finn agreed. It could justify all sorts of changes to how magical education is managed, who's allowed to attend. A return to the old ways, Sage said quietly. Pure blood supremacy disguised as protecting magical education. They sat in silence for a moment, the full scope of the conspiracy settling over them. So what do we do? Marcus asked finally. We stop them, Lyra said simply. But first, we need to know exactly when and how they plan to trigger the failsafe. The first task is in 3 days, Sage pointed out. If they want maximum impact, then we have 3 days to figure out how to save Hogwarts, Finn said cheerfully. No pressure. Marcus began organizing his charts with renewed energy. Right. We need to map every ley line intersection in the castle, identify the most vulnerable points, and figure out how to prevent the failsafe from activating. I can monitor the magical field through my plant network, Sage added. If they start the final phase of their plan, I should be able to detect it. And I'll see what else I can find about this restoration group, Lyra said. My family's library has records going back centuries. If these are former Death Eaters, there might be clues about their identities. What about adult help? Sage asked. Professor Sprout suspects something's wrong, and there must be other faculty we can trust. Lyra shook her head. We can't risk it. If there are ministry officials involved, we don't know who might be compromised. For now, we're on our own. Finn grinned. Just the way I like it. As they prepared to leave, each heading back to their respective common rooms, Marcus paused at the door. You know, a week ago, the most exciting thing in my life was calculating the trajectory of Whomping Willow branches for defense against the dark arts. And now? Sage asked. Now we're trying to save Hogwarts from a conspiracy of former Death Eaters, while representatives from half the magical schools in Europe watch our every move. Marcus shook his head. I'm not sure if this is the best or worst thing that's ever happened to me. Ask me again in 3 days, Lyra said dryly, assuming we're all still alive to answer. As they dispersed into the darkened corridors of Hogwarts, none of them noticed the figure watching from the shadows at the end of the hall, or the small magical device that had been recording their entire conversation. Act 3, The Conspiracy. Chapter 9, The Watchers. Lyra woke to find a note slipped under her dormitory door, written in her own handwriting. The library. Sunrise. Come alone. L. She stared at the parchment for a full minute before the implications hit her. She hadn't written this note. Someone else had. Someone skilled enough in magical forgery to perfectly replicate her handwriting, and confident enough to sign it with her own initial. They knew. Whoever was behind the conspiracy, they knew about the investigation. She dressed quickly and slipped out of the Slytherin common room, her mind racing. The note could be a trap, but it could also be a warning from someone trying to help. Either way, she couldn't ignore it. The library was eerily quiet in the pre-dawn darkness, illuminated only by the faint magical glow of the enchanted ceiling. Lyra made her way to their usual research area, wand drawn and senses alert. Relax, a familiar voice said from the shadows between the stacks. If I wanted to hurt you, you'd already be dead. A figure stepped into the dim light, tall, middle-aged, with graying brown hair and the kind of scars that spoke of serious magical combat. He wore the robes of a ministry official, but something about his stance suggested auror training. Who are you? Lyra demanded, not lowering her wand. Someone who's been watching your little investigation with considerable interest, the man replied. And someone who's here to tell you that you're in far more danger than you realize. Are you with the Restoration? The man's laugh was bitter. Hardly. I'm Alastor Moody, the real one, not the imposter currently teaching defense against the dark arts. And I'm here because 4 students have stumbled onto something that could get them killed. Lyra felt her blood turn cold. If this man was really Alastor Moody, then Barty Crouch Jr. was still impersonating him, which meant the tournament. It's not just about political manipulation, is it? Someone's using it as cover for something else. Very good. The Restoration is real, and they are planning to trigger the Founder's fail-safe during the first task. But that's not their primary objective. It's their distraction. Moody's magical eye whirred as it focused on her. While everyone's attention is focused on the apparent sabotage of Hogwarts, their real target is walking around with a tournament badge pinned to his chest. Harry Potter, Lyra breathed. The boy who lived is considerably more valuable alive than dead, especially to someone trying to return from the grave. The fail-safe ritual requires a massive sacrifice of magical energy. Potter's blood, freely given, would provide more than enough power. Lyra's mind reeled. But how could they force him to give his blood freely? By making him think he's saving Hogwarts, Moody said grimly. The ritual chamber is hidden beneath the castle, accessible through the leyline network you've been studying. When the disturbances reach their peak during the first task, They'll tell Potter that the only way to save the school is for him to power the failsafe manually. He'll walk right into their trap. Why are you telling me this? Why not handle it yourself? Moody's expression grew even grimmer. Because I'm supposed to be locked in a trunk in Barty Crouch Jr.'s office, and if I reveal myself too early, it will tip off the conspiracy. You four are the only ones in a position to act without arousing suspicion. What do you need us to do? Find the ritual chamber before they do. Disable their access to the Leyline network, and whatever you do, keep Potter away from anyone claiming they need his help to save Hogwarts. Moody pulled out a small, irregular object that looked like a broken piece of mirror. This will let you contact me if you need backup, but use it only as a last resort. As he turned to leave, Lyra called after him, "How do we know you're telling the truth? How do we know you're really Moody?" He paused and looked back at her, his scarred face serious. "Because, Miss Blackwood, your grandmother Andromeda Selwyn saved my life during the war, and I swore I'd protect her family if the opportunity ever arose. Consider this me keeping that promise." He melted back into the shadows, leaving Lyra alone with her racing thoughts, and a growing sense that their investigation had just become infinitely more dangerous. Chapter 10. The Ritual Chamber. Marcus found the entrance purely by accident. He'd been in the dungeons, using his magical field detector to map the strongest ley line intersections, when he noticed an inconsistency in the castle's architectural plans. According to his calculations, there should be a large chamber directly beneath the Great Hall, but none of the maps showed anything there. He was examining the wall where the chamber should be when his detector began spinning wildly. The magical field here was so strong it was making his equipment malfunction. "That's interesting," he murmured, running his hands along the stone. It felt different, somehow, older and colder than the surrounding walls. A soft footstep behind him made him spin around, wand ready. "Easy there," Finn said, raising his hands peacefully. "It's just me. Sage sent word that you'd found something down here." "How did she know I was here?" "Plant network," Finn explained with a grin. "The Hufflepuff common room has creeping vines that connect to specimens throughout the castle. Quite clever, really." Marcus relaxed slightly, but kept his wand out. After Lyra's meeting with the mysterious Auror that morning, they were all on edge. "I think I've found where they're planning to conduct the ritual. The problem is, I can't figure out how to get inside." Finn examined the wall with professional interest. "Hidden chamber beneath the Great Hall? That's ambitious. Let me try something." He pressed his hand against the stone and began speaking in what sounded like Gaelic. The words seemed to resonate with the stone itself, and after a moment, a section of the wall began to glow with faint runic script. "Family knowledge," Finn explained when he saw Marcus's surprised expression. "My great-uncle helped with some of the ward work here during the reconstruction after the war. Irish stone singing is useful for finding hidden passages." The wall shimmered and became translucent, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. "Right then," Finn said cheerfully. "Shall we see what they're hiding?" The staircase led to a vast circular chamber carved directly from the bedrock beneath Hogwarts. The walls were covered in the same type of runic script they'd seen in the Room of Requirement, but these were older, much older. At the center of the chamber stood a raised platform surrounded by 7 stone pillars, each one carved with symbols representing the different magical disciplines. "This isn't just a ritual chamber," Marcus breathed, his voice echoing in the vast space. "This is the original foundation chamber, where the founders first anchored Hogwarts's protective magic." Finn was examining the pillars with his resonance detector. "And someone's been modifying it. Look at this." He pointed to fresh chisel marks around the base of each pillar, where new runic script had been carved over the original founder's work. "They're converting the protection ritual into something else," Marcus realized. "Instead of anchoring protective magic, This will channel it all into whoever stands on that platform. Absorbing 1,000 years of accumulated protective magic would be enough power to— Finn paused, his face paling. To bring someone back from beyond the veil. Voldemort, Marcus said quietly. But they need a willing sacrifice to complete the ritual. Someone whose magical signature is already connected to Hogwarts' defenses. Harry Potter, they said together. A slow clap echoed through the chamber, and they spun to find 3 figures emerging from the shadows near the entrance. Marcus recognized one as a ministry official he'd seen at the tournament opening ceremony, but the other 2 were strangers, middle-aged wizards, with the kind of cold eyes that suggested extensive experience with dark magic. "Very good," the ministry official said, his voice cultured and calm. "You've saved us the trouble of explaining our plans before we kill you." Finn and Marcus raised their wands, but they were outnumbered and outmatched. The chamber was too large to disapparate from, and the entrance was blocked. "Though I am curious," the official continued, "how 2 students managed to find a chamber that's been hidden for over a decade. The wards on this place should have kept you away." "Maybe your wards aren't as good as you think," Finn said, his Irish accent thickening with stress. "Or maybe," one of the other figures said, stepping into the light, "you had help from someone who knows this castle very well." Marcus's blood ran cold as he recognized the man's face from old photographs in the library. Antonin Dolohov, a Death Eater, who was supposed to be in Azkaban. "The question is," Dolohov continued, "who's been helping you? And more importantly, how much do they know about our plans?" The ministry official raised his wand, and Marcus saw his own death in the man's eyes. But before anyone could cast a spell, the chamber was suddenly filled with the sound of growing vines. Sage's plant network had followed them down. Chapter 11. Revelations and Betrayals. The vines erupted from the stone floor with impossible speed, their growth accelerated by the concentrated magical energy in the chamber. Within seconds, the room was filled with writhing green tendrils that wrapped around the Death Eater's legs and arms, holding them fast. "Now would be a good time to leave," Sage's voice called from the entrance, where she stood with Lyra beside her. But as Marcus and Finn ran toward their friends, more figures appeared in the doorway, including one that made Lyra's face go ashen with shock. "Hello, granddaughter," said Bellatrix Lestrange, her wild hair and manic grin unmistakable even after years in Azkaban. "Surprised to see me?" "You're supposed to be dead," Lyra whispered. "Dead? Hardly. Merely relocated. Azkaban was becoming so tiresome." Bellatrix's laugh was like breaking glass. "Though I must say I'm disappointed in you, dear. Working with mudbloods and blood traitors? Your grandmother would be ashamed." "My grandmother fought against people like you," Lyra snapped, finding her voice. "Your grandmother was weak. She chose love over power. And look where it got her, a half-blood granddaughter consorting with enemies of pure, magical blood." Bellatrix raised her wand, and the temperature in the chamber dropped noticeably. "But don't worry, darling. I'll put you out of your misery quickly." The spell she cast was a sickly green that Marcus recognized from Defense Against the Dark Arts textbooks. The Killing Curse. Lyra dove sideways, but she wasn't fast enough. The curse would have hit her if Finn hadn't tackled her to the ground, taking the spell meant for her across his back. He hit the stone floor hard and didn't get up. "Finn!" Sage screamed, abandoning her control of the vines to rush to his side. The Death Eaters, freed from the plant restraints, began advancing on them with wands raised. Marcus grabbed Finn's resonance detector from where it had fallen and aimed it at the central platform. "If you kill us," he called out desperately, "you'll never figure out how to properly calibrate the ritual. This chamber's magical field is unstable. One wrong calculation and the whole thing will collapse, taking half the castle with it." Dolohov paused. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Marcus held up the detector, which was spinning wildly in the concentrated magical field. The ley line convergence here is more complex than anything in the theoretical literature. Without proper arithmetic analysis, your ritual will fail. He's right, the ministry official said grimly. We've been having problems with the calibration. The magical interference patterns are too complex to map by hand. So we keep the Ravenclaw alive until after the ritual, Bellatrix said with a shrug. The others can still die. Actually, a new voice said from the chamber entrance, I think you'll find that none of them will be dying today. Alistair Moody stepped into the chamber, his magical eye whirring as it took in the scene. Behind him came Professor McGonagall, Professor Sprout, and, to everyone's surprise, the real Professor Moody, looking considerably worse for wear, but very much alive. Barty Crouch Jr. sends his regards, the real Moody growled, stunning one of the Death Eaters before anyone could react. Though he won't be sending anything else from his Dementor's kiss. The battle that followed was brief but intense. Bellatrix managed to escape in the chaos, but Dolohov and the ministry official were captured. As the professors secured the prisoners, Sage knelt beside Finn, tears streaming down her face. He's not dead, she said, her voice thick with relief. The curse hit his shoulder, not his heart, but he's badly hurt. We need to get him to the hospital wing, Professor McGonagall said briskly. And then you four are going to explain exactly how you knew about this chamber and why you thought it was a good idea to investigate a Death Eater conspiracy on your own. As they levitated Finn's unconscious form toward the castle's medical facilities, Marcus caught Lyra's arm. Your grandmother, he said quietly. Moody said she saved his life, but Bellatrix called her weak for choosing love over power. What really happened? Lyra was quiet for a long moment. Andromeda Selwyn was disowned by the Black family for marrying a Muggle-born wizard. She spent the war helping people escape Death Eater persecution, including Aurors like Moody. She died protecting a group of Muggle children from a Death Eater attack. She sounds like she was brave. She was, and she taught me that being a Slytherin doesn't mean you have to choose the easy path. Lyra looked back at the chamber, where the runic carvings were already beginning to fade as the professors dismantled the dark magic. I just hope we stopped them in time. Chapter 12. The tournament continues. 3 days later, Finn was conscious but still confined to the hospital wing, his shoulder heavily bandaged and his usual cheerful demeanor somewhat dimmed by pain medication. The first task had proceeded without incident. Harry Potter had faced his dragon and retrieved the golden egg, completely unaware of how close he'd come to being used as a human sacrifice. So, let me get this straight, Finn said, propped up against his pillows, as the other three filled him in on what he'd missed. Bellatrix Lestrange is my cousin's great-aunt. The Ministry of Magic had Death Eaters in positions of authority, and we prevented the resurrection of you-know-who by accidentally discovering a 1,000-year-old ritual chamber. That's about the size of it, Marcus confirmed, though I should point out that my calculations were instrumental in— Marcus, Sage interrupted gently, you can explain your arithmetic brilliance later. Right now, I think we should focus on the fact that Bellatrix escaped. The Aurors are looking for her, Lyra said, though her voice suggested she wasn't entirely confident in their abilities, along with whatever other Death Eaters might still be at large. Speaking of which, Finn said, his tone growing more serious, has anyone else wondered how they managed to hide a conspiracy this large for so long? I mean, modifying the Foundation Chamber, infiltrating the Ministry, coordinating with escaped prisoners. You think there are more of them, Marcus said. It wasn't a question. I think what we uncovered was just one cell of a much larger organization, Finn replied. The restoration isn't just about bringing back Voldemort. It's about restoring the old pure-blood power structure. That kind of systematic change requires long-term planning and significant resources. Lyra nodded grimly. Which means this isn't over. No, agreed a familiar voice from the doorway. Professor McGonagall entered, followed by the real Professor Moody, who was looking much healthier after several days of proper medical care. "It's not over," McGonagall continued, settling into a chair beside Finn's bed. "But, thanks to your actions, we've disrupted their immediate plans and captured several key operatives. The Ministry is taking the threat seriously now." "What happens to us?" Sage asked nervously. "We did break about a dozen school rules investigating this." "You saved Hogwarts and possibly prevented a second war," Moody said bluntly. "I think we can overlook a few violations of curfew." "However," McGonagall added with a stern look, "in the future, if you discover evidence of dark wizard activity, you will report it to the faculty immediately. Is that understood?" They all nodded, though Marcus couldn't help asking, "What if the faculty are compromised again?" "Then you use this," Moody said, pulling out 4 small mirrors similar to the one he'd given Lyra. "Direct communication with the Aura Corps bypassed around Ministry channels, but only in genuine emergencies." "Are we in danger?" Sage asked. "From the Death Eaters who escaped?" "Bellatrix Lestrange has never been known for forgetting a slight," Moody admitted. "But she's also never been one for subtlety. We'll know if she's planning revenge." "What about the tournament?" Finn asked. "Will it continue?" "Yes," McGonagall said. "Canceling it now would only give the Death Eaters the disruption they wanted. Harry Potter will compete in the remaining tasks, though with significantly increased security." As the professors prepared to leave, Moody paused at the door. "You 4 did good work," he said gruffly. "Better than some trained aurors I've known. But remember, you got lucky this time. Dark wizards don't usually give you a second chance to make mistakes." After they left, the 4 friends sat in comfortable silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts about what they'd experienced and what it might mean for their futures. "So," Finn said eventually, "anyone fancy taking up a nice, safe hobby? Wizard chess, perhaps? Or collecting chocolate frog cards? Where's the adventure in that?" Sage asked with a smile that was only slightly forced. "Besides," Lyra added, "someone needs to keep an eye on things, make sure the Restoration doesn't try again." "And if they do?" Marcus asked. They looked at each other, Slytherin, Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff, and Gryffindor, and realized that somewhere between investigating magical disturbances and fighting Death Eaters, they'd become something more than just fellow students. They'd become a team. "Then we stop them again," Finn said simply. "However many times it takes." Outside the hospital wing windows, snow was beginning to fall on the Hogwarts grounds, covering the scars left by their recent battle and promising a peaceful winter ahead. But all 4 of them knew that peace, in the wizarding world, was often just the calm before the next storm. And when that storm came, they would be ready. Act 4, the confrontation. Chapter 13, Shadows in the Snow. 2 weeks had passed since the incident in the ritual chamber, and Hogwarts had settled into what appeared to be peaceful routine. The second task of the Tri-Wizard tournament loomed ahead. The lake had frozen over in beautiful crystalline patterns, and most students seemed blissfully unaware of how close they'd come to disaster. But Lyra Blackwood knew better than to trust apparent peace. She was making her way back from the library late one evening, her arms full of books on protective ward theory, when she noticed the footprints in the snow. They were too large to belong to a student, and they led from the Forbidden Forest directly toward the castle stopping just outside the range of the perimeter wards. Someone had been watching Hogwarts. Someone who knew exactly where the magical protections began and ended. Lyra followed the prince carefully, her wand ready and her senses alert. The trail led to a cluster of trees near the edge of the forest, where the snow had been disturbed as if someone had waited there for hours. Carved into the bark of the largest oak, still fresh enough to seep sap, was the same symbol they'd found in the Room of Requirement. A serpent, wrapped around a broken wand. Below it, in elegant script that made her blood run cold, were the words, "Soon, granddaughter." Lyra was running before she'd consciously decided to move. She found the others in their usual abandoned classroom, where Marcus was working on homework, and Sage was tending to a collection of plants that now served as an early warning system for magical disturbances. Finn was there too, his arm still in a sling, but his spirits apparently recovered. "She's here," Lyra announced without preamble. "Bellatrix is somewhere near the castle." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "Are you certain?" Marcus asked, setting aside his arithmancy essay. Lyra described the footprints and the carved message, watching her friends' faces grow increasingly grim. "We need to contact Moody," Sage said immediately, reaching for one of the communication mirrors they'd been given. "Wait," Finn said, his voice thoughtful. "If Bellatrix wanted to attack the castle directly, she would have done it already. She's here for a reason, and I don't think it's just revenge." "What do you mean?" Lyra asked. "Think about it. The second task is in 3 days. Harry Potter will be in the lake, underwater for an extended period. Vulnerable." Finn's eyes were sharp despite his casual tone. "If I were planning to kidnap the boy who lived, that's when I'd do it." Marcus began pulling out charts and calculations. The lake connects to underground waterways that extend for miles. Someone could approach from any direction without being detected by the castle's wards. "But the task has security," Sage protested. "Professors, ministry officials, representatives from the other schools, all focused on the surface." "Chase," Finn pointed out, "how many of them do you think are monitoring what's happening 50 feet down?" Lyra felt a familiar chill of understanding. "It's the same pattern as before. Create a distraction. Then strike while everyone's attention is focused elsewhere." "So what do we do?" Marcus asked. "We can't exactly warn Harry Potter that his aunt-in-law is planning to kidnap him during the tournament." "We can't warn him directly," Lyra said slowly, an idea beginning to form. "But we can make sure he's not alone down there." Chapter 14. Underwater Preparations. The second task was set to begin at 11 in the morning, but by dawn, the four friends were already at work. They'd spent the previous night researching underwater magic and protective charms, and now they were implementing what they'd learned. Sage was in the greenhouse, preparing a collection of aquatic plants that could survive in the lake's magical environment. "Gillyweed for breathing," she explained to the others, "but also water wiggentree branches for protection against dark magic, and mermish kelp that will glow if it detects hostile magical signatures." Marcus was calibrating a waterproof version of Finn's resonance detector. If there are any unauthorized magical workings in the lake during the task, this should pick them up. The problem is range water interferes with magical detection. "That's where I come in," Finn said, testing the mobility of his injured arm. "I can't swim well with this shoulder, but I can position detection equipment around the lake perimeter." "And I'll be watching from above," Lyra added. "If Bellatrix makes her move, she'll need to coordinate with someone on the surface." As they worked, Professor McGonagall appeared in the greenhouse doorway. "Miss Clearwater, I need to speak with you about the plants you've been cultivating." Sage froze, her hands still full of glowing kelp. "Professor, I can explain." "No explanation necessary," McGonagall said briskly. "Professor Sprout told me about your enhanced botanical studies. I'm here to inform you that your services have been requested for the second task." My services? "The task requires underwater navigation and problem-solving. The judges have decided that each champion should have access to appropriate magical assistance within reason." McGonagall's eyes twinkled slightly. "It seems your expertise with aquatic plants qualifies as appropriate assistance." Sage looked confused. "But I'm not qualified to—" "You are now," McGonagall interrupted, handing her an official-looking badge. "Congratulations, Miss Clearwater. You're the youngest consulting herbologist in tournament history." As McGonagall left, the four friends looked at each other in amazement. "They want you to help with the task," Marcus said slowly, "which means you'll be there when Bellatrix makes her move," Sage finished. "This isn't a coincidence. No, Lyra agreed grimly. Someone arranged this. The question is whether they're trying to help us or put Sage in danger. Finn was examining the official badge with his good hand. The authorization seals are genuine, but... He held it up to the light, and faint magical script became visible around the edges. There's a tracking charm embedded in it. Someone will know exactly where Sage is at all times during the task. Protection or surveillance? Marcus wondered. With our luck, probably both. Chapter 15. The Lake's Secrets. The morning of the second task dawned gray and cold, with a bitter wind that turned the lake's surface into choppy whitecaps. Students and spectators gathered on the temporary stands that had been erected along the shoreline, while the champions prepared for their underwater ordeal. Sage stood with the other task consultants, a group that included several professors and ministry officials she didn't recognize. Her badge felt heavy against her chest, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The champions will enter the lake simultaneously, Professor Dumbledore was explaining to the assembled crowd. They have 1 hour to retrieve their treasures from the depths and return to the surface. Sage knew what the treasures were, people. Hermione Granger for Victor Crumb, Cho Chang for Cedric Diggory, Fleur Delacour's sister Gabrielle, and Ron Weasley for Harry Potter. They were currently under a magical sleep in the lake's depths, guarded by the merpeople. What the crowd didn't know was that Sage had spent the early morning hours planting her modified kelp throughout the lake's underwater terrain. If anything magical and hostile entered the water, she would know about it. The champions entered the lake with various magical aids, Cedric with a bubble-head charm, Fleur with what looked like a partial transformation, Crumb with a shark head transfiguration, and Harry with what she suspected was gillyweed. They disappeared beneath the surface as the crowd cheered. Sage activated her connection to the kelp network and immediately felt the underwater environment through her plants. The lake was deeper than she'd expected, with underwater caverns and tunnels that seemed to extend far beyond the castle grounds. For the first 20 minutes, everything proceeded normally. She could sense the champions making their way toward the merpeople's village, navigating the maze of underwater rocks and plants. But then, something changed. A new magical signature entered the water cold, dark, and moving with purpose toward the merpeople's village. It wasn't one of the champions, and it definitely wasn't friendly. "Professor McGonagall," Sage called urgently, but when she turned, the deputy headmistress was nowhere to be seen. In fact, several of the officials who had been standing nearby moments before had mysteriously vanished. Sage activated her communication mirror. "Lyra, we have a problem. Something's in the lake, and half the officials just disappeared." "I see them," Lyra's voice crackled back through the magical connection. "They're moving toward the forest. It's a diversion. Someone's trying to draw security away from the lake." "What about Marcus and Finn?" "Marcus is tracking magical signatures around the perimeter. Finn is—" There was a pause. Finn's communication mirror just went dark. Sage's blood turned cold. Through her kelp network, she could sense that whatever had entered the lake was now very close to the merpeople's village. And if the officials had been lured away, there was no one left to protect the champions. No one except her. Without giving herself time to think about how incredibly stupid this was, Sage grabbed the emergency gillyweed from her botanical kit and jumped into the lake. The water was shockingly cold, even with the magical protections woven into her robes. The gillyweed took effect quickly, gills sprouting along her neck and webbing appearing between her fingers. She dove deep, following the network of glowing kelp toward the disturbance she'd detected. The merpeople's village was a collection of crude stone buildings clustered around a central square, where the 4 treasures hung suspended in the water, still under their magical sleep. She could see Harry Potter nearby, apparently debating whether to rescue all the hostages or just Ron. But moving through the shadows at the edge of the village was a figure that made Sage's newly formed gills flutter with terror. Bellatrix Lestrange, somehow breathing underwater and moving with deadly purpose toward the sleeping forms. Chapter 16. Depths of Courage. Sage had never been in a real magical duel before. Her expertise was with growing things, nurturing life, helping plants flourish. But as she watched Bellatrix Lestrange raise her wand toward the defenseless hostages, she realized that sometimes nurturing life meant being willing to fight for it. She drew her own wand and cast the strongest protective charm she knew. A shield of living water that erupted from the lake bed in a tangle of magical kelp and pondweed. The plants wrapped around Bellatrix like grasping fingers, holding her back from her targets. Bellatrix spun in the water, her wild hair streaming around her face as she searched for her attacker. When she spotted Sage, her expression shifted from surprise to delighted malice. "Well, well," Bellatrix's voice carried clearly through the water, magically enhanced. "A little Hufflepuff playing hero. How pathetic." She slashed her wand, and the protective plants withered and died instantly. Dark magic, Sage realized, the kind that could corrupt and destroy living things with a touch. But Sage had spent 6 years learning that every plant had its purpose, and not all of them were gentle. She reached out to the kelp network she'd established throughout the lake, calling on species that had evolved in the depths where sunlight never reached. Strangling vines erupted from the lake floor, their thorns dripping with natural toxins. Carnivorous water plants unfurled like underwater flowers, their petal mouths lined with needle-sharp teeth. Bellatrix found herself fighting not just one teenage witch, but an entire ecosystem that had been turned against her. "Clever girl," Bellatrix snarled, blasting through a wall of thorned vines. "But plants are living things, and I know exactly how to hurt living things." The curse she cast was sickly yellow, and everywhere it touched, Sage's protective plants began to rot from within. The corruption spread like a disease through the network, and Sage felt each dying plant like a physical blow. But the attack had bought her precious time. Harry Potter had noticed the battle and was swimming toward them, his own wand ready. Behind him, Sage could see Cedric Diggory ascending with Cho Chang, while Victor Crumb was freeing Hermione. "Potter!" Bellatrix's attention shifted to her real target. "How convenient! 2 birds with 1 stone." She raised her wand, and Sage knew with horrible certainty that she was about to cast the killing curse not at Harry, but at one of the hostages. Force Harry to choose between saving an innocent life and protecting himself. But Sage wasn't the only one who had learned from their previous encounter with Death Eaters. A silver stag erupted from Harry's wand, his Patronus, somehow maintaining its form even underwater. The spectral deer charged Bellatrix, disrupting her concentration and sending her tumbling through the water. "Get the hostages to the surface," Harry called to Sage. "I'll handle her." "You can't fight her alone," Sage protested. But Harry was already moving, his gillyweed-enhanced form cutting through the water with surprising speed. The duel that followed was unlike anything Sage had ever witnessed. Harry's magic was raw and powerful, but Bellatrix had decades of experience with the darkest spells imaginable. They fought through the ruins of the Merpeople's village, their spells turning the water into a chaos of light and shadow. Sage focused on her own task, using her connection to the kelp network to create a protective corridor for the remaining hostages. Ron Weasley and Gabrielle Delacour were still unconscious, suspended in the magical sleep that was supposed to keep them safe. But as she reached for Ron, something grabbed her ankle. A Grindylow, a water demon, with long, pale fingers and a taste for young witches and wizards. But this one's eyes were glowing with the same sickly light as Bellatrix's curses. It had been corrupted, turned into a weapon. More creatures emerged from the deeper parts of the lake kelpies, with rotting manes, merpeople with blackened gills, all showing signs of dark, magical corruption. Bellatrix hadn't come alone. She'd brought an army of corrupted lake creatures. "Harry!" Sage called out, but he was pinned down by Bellatrix's relentless attacks. The corrupted creatures closed in, and Sage realized with growing horror that she was about to become their first victim. But then, through her connection to the plant network, she felt something else. A warm, familiar, magical signature approaching fast. Marcus Chen burst into the underwater battle zone, somehow breathing without gillyweed and moving through the water like he'd been born to it. Behind him came a school of normal lake creatures, uncorrupted fish, frogs, and water insects that swarmed the corrupted beings with natural fury. "Arithmantic water-breathing charm," he explained breathlessly as he reached Sage's side, "and a mathematical model for controlling aquatic ecosystems. I thought you might need backup." Together, they managed to free the hostages and create a protective barrier around them. But the real battle was still between Harry and Bellatrix, and it was clear that Harry was being overwhelmed by her experience and ruthlessness. That's when Finn O'Sullivan arrived. He descended from above like an avenging angel, his injured arm strapped to his side, but his good hand wielding his wand with deadly precision. His magic was different from anything Sage had seen before, older somehow, with the weight of ancient Irish battle magic behind it. "Sorry I'm late," he called cheerfully, despite the fact that he was diving into a battle with one of the most dangerous witches alive. "Had to make a stop at the Forbidden Forest first." He gestured with his wand, and suddenly the lake was full of creatures that definitely hadn't been there before. Centaurs moving through the water with impossible grace, unicorns whose hooves seemed to dance on the lake's surface, and a massive phoenix whose flames somehow burned even underwater. "Forest Alliance," Finn explained with a grin. "My family's been building relationships with magical creatures for generations. Seemed like a good time to call in some favors." The tide of battle turned instantly. Bellatrix, faced with an army of pure magical creatures and 4 determined students, realized she was outmatched. With a final curse that turned a section of the lakebed to poisonous mud, she disapparated, leaving behind only the lingering smell of dark magic and corruption. As the various creatures departed, and the lake began to return to normal, the 4 friends floated near the surface with the rescued hostages, all of them breathing hard and trying to process what had just happened. "So," Finn said eventually, "anyone else think we're getting really good at this whole fighting dark wizards thing?" "Speak for yourself," Marcus muttered. "I just used 3 weeks' worth of arithmetic calculations in 10 minutes. My brain feels like it's melting." "At least your brain is still in your head," Sage added, checking Ron and Gabrielle to make sure they were unharmed. "I thought that Grindylow was going to drag me to the bottom of the lake." "We all thought that," Lyra's voice said from above them. She was descending on what looked like a conjured platform of ice, her robes billowing dramatically around her. "I've been watching from the shore, trying to coordinate with the professors, most of whom, by the way, are just now returning from their wild goose chase in the Forbidden Forest." Harry Potter surfaced nearby, looking exhausted but determined. "Is everyone all right? The hostages?" "Are fine," Sage assured him, "though you might want to have Madame Pomfrey check them over. Dark magic corruption can have lingering effects." As they made their way back to shore, where a crowd of worried officials and spectators waited, Sage realized that their quiet investigation had officially become something much more serious. They weren't just students anymore. They were active participants in a war that most people didn't even know was being fought. And judging by the look in Lyra's eyes as she watched the shoreline, this latest battle was far from over. Epilogue. New Beginnings. Chapter 17. The Third Task and Beyond. The third task of the Triwizard Tournament took place on a warm June evening, with the setting sun casting long shadows across the maze that had been constructed on the Quidditch pitch. But this time, the 4 friends weren't scrambling to prevent a disaster. They were part of the official security detail. I still can't believe McGonagall convinced the Ministry to give us actual positions, Marcus said, adjusting the official badge on his robes that marked him as a magical field analyst. After we prevented 2 separate Death Eater attacks and saved the boy who lived multiple times, I think they decided we were more useful working with them than around them, Sage replied. Her own badge read Botanical Security Consultant, and she had spent the past week ensuring that every plant in the maze was loyal to Hogwarts rather than to any potential dark magic. Finn, his arm finally healed, wore the badge of a creature liaison specialist. The centaurs, unicorns, and other forest creatures who had helped in the lake battle had agreed to maintain a protective perimeter around the tournament grounds. Plus, he added with a grin, I think Moody was getting tired of us going off on our own investigations. Lyra's badge simply read Strategic Advisor, which she claimed was ministry speak for the one who thinks ahead while everyone else is panicking. She was stationed in the judge's box, watching for any signs of magical interference or unauthorized port keys. The task itself proceeded smoothly, too smoothly, given their recent experiences. Harry Potter and Cedric Diggory reached the center of the maze simultaneously and agreed to take the Triwizard Cup together. They grabbed the trophy, disappeared in the flash of portkey magic, and something's wrong. Lyra's voice crackled through their communication mirrors. The portkey signature is all wrong. That wasn't a return journey. It was a departure to somewhere else entirely. The crowd in the stands was still cheering, unaware that their champions had just been kidnapped. But in the judge's box, Dumbledore's face had gone pale with understanding. Little Hangleton, he said quietly, loud enough for Lyra to hear. The graveyard. Tom Riddle's family plot. Marcus's arithmetic calculations confirmed their worst fears. The magical disturbance patterns indicated a massive dark ritual taking place several miles away. They're trying to resurrect Voldemort, he reported grimly, and they have Harry Potter. Not for long, Finn said, and there was something in his voice that reminded them all that for all his cheerful demeanor, he came from a family that had been fighting dark wizards for generations. What followed was not the desperate, improvised investigation they'd conducted earlier in the year. This was a coordinated rescue mission, with the 4 friends working alongside aurors, professors, and magical creatures in a carefully planned assault on the Little Hangleton graveyard. Sage's botanical network provided reconnaissance, mapping the location of every person in the graveyard and identifying which ones were under the influence of dark magic. Marcus calculated the precise timing needed to disrupt Voldemort's resurrection ritual. Finn coordinated the creature allies who would provide backup and evacuation routes, and Lyra planned the overall strategy, accounting for every variable she could think of. They arrived just as Voldemort's new body was taking shape, fed by Harry's blood and the bone of his father. The Dark Lord stood in his circle of Death Eaters, pale and terrible and fully restored to power. But he found himself facing not just Harry Potter, but a small army of witches, wizards, and magical creatures who had learned from his previous reign of terror. The battle was brief but decisive. Voldemort's Death Eaters, caught off guard by the coordinated response, were quickly overwhelmed. Voldemort himself, still weak from his resurrection, was forced to flee rather than face capture. Harry Potter and Cedric Diggory were rescued, shaken but alive. The Death Eaters were captured, and the wizarding world learned that the rumors of Voldemort's return were horrifyingly true. 3 months later, the autumn term began with Hogwarts looking much the same as it always had, but feeling fundamentally different. There were new protective wards that hummed with power, additional security measures that most students never noticed, and a subtle sense that the school had weathered a storm and emerged stronger. The 4 friends found themselves in an unusual position. They were still students, but they were also officially recognized as junior members of the Order of the Phoenix. The secret organization Dumbledore had reformed to fight Voldemort's return. "It's strange," Sage said as they sat in what had become their permanent meeting room, the abandoned classroom where they'd first planned their investigation. "A year ago, the most exciting thing in my life was discovering a new species of flowering vine. And now you're developing combat applications for carnivorous plants," Marcus pointed out. "I saw your notes on the venomous tentacula modification. Brilliant work, by the way." "Speaking of brilliant work," Finn added, "did you see the Ministry's new early warning system? It's based entirely on your arithmetic models for detecting magical field disturbances." Marcus flushed with pride. "It's just math, really. Anyone could have figured it out. Anyone with your particular genius for seeing patterns where others see chaos," Lyra corrected. "The Ministry has offered you an apprenticeship with the Department of Mysteries, you know." "What about you?" Sage asked. "I heard rumors that you've been in talks with the International Confederation of Wizards." Lyra nodded. "They want me to help establish protocols for dealing with international dark wizard conspiracies. Apparently, our experience with the Restoration has become something of a case study. And Finn's been corresponding with magical creature preserves across Europe," Marcus added. "Something about establishing a network of creature allies?" Finn's grin was answer enough. "The old alliances served us well during the war against Voldemort the first time. It seems wise to rebuild them before he gets any stronger." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, each contemplating the strange turns their lives had taken. A year ago, they had been ordinary students in different houses, with little in common beyond their presence at Hogwarts. Now they were battle-tested veterans of a secret war, bound together by shared danger and mutual trust. "So what happens now?" Sage asked eventually. "Now we finish school," Lyra said practically. "We take our NEWTs, we graduate, and we move on to whatever comes next." "While keeping an eye out for Death Eater conspiracies," Marcus added. "And maintaining our creature alliances," Finn contributed. "And making sure our plant networks stay loyal to the right side," Sage finished. Lyra smiled, a real smile, not the sharp, calculating expression she'd worn for most of their acquaintance. "In other words, we stay together, whatever comes." "The four houses, united," Marcus said, raising his pumpkin juice in a mock toast. "Against dark wizards, conspiracy, and really poor strategic planning," Finn added, raising his own cup. "For Hogwarts, for the wizarding world, and for each other," Sage concluded. "For the future we're going to build," Lyra finished. Outside their window, the sun was setting over the Hogwarts grounds, painting the castle in shades of gold and crimson. The whomping willow swayed peacefully in the evening breeze, the lake reflected the last light of day, and somewhere in the forbidden forest, the creatures who had become their allies moved through shadows that no longer seemed quite so threatening. It was a peaceful scene, but all four of them knew that peace was something that had to be fought for, protected, and earned again and again. They had learned that lesson well over the past year. They had also learned that when the darkness came, and it would come again, they wouldn't face it alone. The Serpent's Gambit had failed, but the game was far from over. And when the next move came, they would be ready, together.